Welcome to another offering from BDO's Center for Corporate Governance and Financial Reporting. I'm Amy Rojic, a partner within our National Practice Office, and I founded and direct our firm's Center for Corporate Governance. I am so incredibly pleased to be joined today by Betsy Atkins. She's the CEO and founder of Baja Corp, an early-stage technology, energy, and healthcare investment company focused on the use of technology as a profit and growth driver for industries and businesses by building high-performing boards, using governance best practices and deep domain focus on technology as an enabler and competitive accelerant for businesses of all sizes. Betsy is actually a three-time CEO and serial entrepreneur. She has co-founded enterprise software companies in multiple industries, including energy, healthcare, and networking. She's an expert in scaling companies through hypergrowth and leading them to successful IPO and acquisitions. Her more notable IPOs and sales include the acquisition of Clear Standards by SAP and Ascend Communications, which was $5.4 billion in revenue, which was then later acquired by Lucent for $23 billion. At Baja Corporation, Betsy has built three early-stage funds investing in enterprise, software, healthcare, and energy. She's a corporate governance expert with an eye for making boards a competitive asset, and her board experience is quite vast and covers multiple industries, including technology, retail, financial services, healthcare, hospitality, auto, CPG, manufacturing, and logistics. And I could go on, but it may be more fun to show you who Betsy is.
Betsy Atkins joins us now. Hello.
I'm speaking with Betsy Atkins.
Expert Betsy Atkins
joins us. Betsy, hello.
Betsy Atkins is a corporate governance expert, three-time CEO, serial entrepreneur, author, and a national television and editorial contributor on topics such as crisis management for boards.
Well, first, they need to have a crisis management plan. They have to figure out the 3 to 5 things that are likely to go wrong. And when you actually test your crisis management plan, you'll find all kinds of gaps.
Betsy is an effective operational leader. She has a strong operational perspective.
Now the threat is your company isn't relevant, it isn't competitive, it disappears. You need directors to future-proof the company.
She is a force of growth and accelerant for businesses that are looking to lead with innovation, new business models, and technology reshaping industries and markets.
Technology is a really board-worthy topic, and in fact, probably 10% of Fortune 500 companies already have a tech committee, and with good reason.
Betsy is leading the conversation on how to bring innovation to the boards, mentoring management and CEOs. She has served in over 28 public and private boards.
You served on 28 different boards, is that right?
I have, yes. Lots of scar tissue and pattern recognition.
That include iconic brands like Volvo, Wynn, Darden Restaurant, Chico's, Polycom, NASDAQ, and many others. She is the go-to person for resources and solutions on crisis management and diversity in the boardroom. Betsy has a clear roadmap for how to join a board and then become a world-class contributor and accelerant.
For me, my next step is going to be to continue serving on boards. I like to think of myself as a board whisperer, sometimes a board warrior, but mostly a board whisperer, and mentoring CEOs and helping management teams achieve their potential, both in public and private boards.
All right. Well, hopefully that gave you a flavor. If you don't know Betsy by now, you're going to spend the next 45 minutes getting to know her a little bit better and her vast years of experience working with corporate boards and getting a sense of where we are today in this kind of crazy world we're all finding ourselves and how to be a more proactive governance proponent. So I hope you enjoyed that, and it'll give you a flavor for the caliber that Betsy brings, and she's kindly agreed to speak to me today. And we're going to cover a variety of topics, starting with matters around human capital, responsibilities of the board for emerging risks, communication and engagement, as well as issues that are percolating just on the horizon. So as mentioned by Sean, please do submit questions via the Q&A as we go, and we'll attempt to address these during the program, or we can certainly follow up after the program. And a lot of the insights that Betsy will share today and some of the questions that get posed to her will be done in a follow-up publication, so we'll be sure to bring that to your attention. So we've kept our slide deck rather light today, more to focus on the conversation at hand, but we've sprinkled in some resources and some key action items for consideration within each topical section. So let's jump in. We're going to start off with navigating in a crisis. And I think, Betsy, you're no stranger to being on boards, obviously. And one of my favorite governance reads happens to be your most recent book, Be Board Ready. And the experiences and thoughts that you've packed into that book, it not only makes for easy reading, but it's literally a pocket-sized MBA program is how I liken it. And having been through an MBA program, I know what that's like. It's just the experiences, though, that you've put in there and the way you've laid it out, I thought was really impactful. So given the times we're in now, can you share with us an early experience of your board journey as an independent director and how you've jumped right into a crisis situation?
I'd be delighted. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for your time and your engagement. And I'm very, very delighted to be with you. And thank you, Amy. I'll give you one anecdote. I've told this story a few times only because it shocked me. It was my second public board. I joined the board of Health South. And this was right when the famous Richard Scrushy debacle occurred. He had been accused of insider trading. And I joined as the independent director to chair the special litigation committee to look into the allegations by the SEC. And 16 days, I was on the board just a short period of time, and the FBI and the Department of Justice stormed the company's premises and seized the records. And I was the acting chair, and we were put into suspended trading. The New York Stock Exchange halted all trading. And there were 11 board members. I really didn't know them very well. And they were all pretty close, not all, but many of them were close friends of the founder and CEO, Richard Scrushy. And they were not experienced. One was from the local, plate glass window company in Alabama. So they were small businessmen, some professional investors, but kind of had grown up with the company. Anyhow, the trading was suspended. And as the chair, I called everybody and said, we need to have an emergency board meeting. And they all said, no, we don't. Why? I said, no, we do. And everybody has to get on the call. And by the time we got everybody on the call, they were hesitant, reluctant. They didn't see the need. They all showed up with lawyers by the end of the day. So it was 11 people, 11 lawyers. We had to dial back in because you would lose privilege. And going through a crisis, we had about 55,000 employees, and we had over 3,000 people in hospitals. And we were concerned we wouldn't be able to make payroll because we were put on suspended trading. There were allegations that we had cooked our books that we were looking into. And so our credit lines were frozen. And what I learned in going through an enormous crisis is you have to make one decision every day and make the hardest, most important decision and get everybody together and focused. And in a crisis, you have to go forward and you have to actually do the work yourself. You cannot abdicate to your outside advisors, your bankers, your attorneys. You have to actually dive in, do the work, do the research, and figure it out. And if you're making a decision based on the premise that all of your life saving, your friends, your family are invested here, and you're going to make the very best business decision you can, it'll be the right decision, and you'll be protected under the business judgment rule anyhow. But a severe crisis, the key thing is don't be paralyzed and do the work yourself and make the decisions and keep making them one at a time. Don't let it be a huge thing. Make the first big decision and then move from there.
Now that makes a lot of sense. And I think, don't bite off more than you can chew, but focus on the tangible information first. So let's, one of the things that I indicated we were doing, and I've already not advanced the slides, but we have a whole bunch of action items for consideration. And they're, not to be an all-inclusive list, but some of the things that, in thinking about crisis mode and the fiduciary responsibilities of the board in terms of acting in the best interest of shareholders, just putting that lens on, or that thinking cap when you're faced with an issue such as we're faced with today with COVID-19, with everything else that's happening in society today. Is there any other parting thoughts, Betsy, that you would share with our listeners before we get into some of the really hot topics of the day?
I think the key thing is to make the biggest decisions first. So look to the financial stability first. And make sure you're connected with your investors. And, once you get through the, will you survive? Do you have the finances? Then, just keep moving up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs in the pyramid to making the critical most decisions first. And actually taking one big topic at a time and working through it with your colleagues.
Great. All right, so let's talk about some of the more pressing cultural and human capital impacts that you're seeing in the boardroom. And managing employee retention is and recruitment continues to be a significant concern as companies determine the economic realities, the cost containment initiatives that they've undergone, and capacity issues. So, what are your views potentially on headcount reductions or RIFs versus alternative measures that companies have taken?
So wherever you can, you now have this opportunity because of this COVID crisis to really do a harder look at your employee base. Everybody knows when they have an A player, those people are your jewels. And everybody knows when you have a C player that you should move them out. The tough part is the B player. How can you forward build your company? Can you use this time to forward hire, to upgrade where possible? And can you use this time to reskill? Because, we have so many macro trends that are going to stick with us, right? Virtual work is going to stay. The gig economy is going to stay. The online economy is going to grow. Data-driven analytics decision-making is going to increase and make businesses more successful. So it raises the question, can you reskill? Do you have the right skill mix? Because now is the time when you could more easily start to shift your skill mix and do that forward hiring. I think it's an opportunity. Also, many companies, don't go back and look to see if they have fat in the organization that they can take out. So this, particular crisis window gives you permission to go look at those things.
Now, I think that's great. And some of the things that I know in speaking with other board members is really looking at the capacity. So looking beyond the kind of the short-term cost containment and can we sustain a workforce? How do we get creative? Because we know that when things open up again, when things get better, or the hope is that they will get better, we want to make sure we have those skilled employees on staff and that they aren't doing things that you're suggesting in terms of maybe being siphoned away to other companies looking to upscale. So how do we preserve those employees without, putting ourselves in jeopardy of, economically? So I think that's a really important thing. And one of the things that we were talking about is what does the compensation factor look like? Because that's an issue that I think every board in America is talking about, from the their most senior executives, the board itself, down to, their staff employee base. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a great question, Amy, because every board is now faced with this, because in the beginning of the year, you approved your annual operating plan. You had your long-term incentive, typically 3-year long-term incentive metrics, because we all have to be performance driven. And then you had your annual bonus short-term incentive plan. And that's all out the window. And, your employees are working harder than ever. Depending on the company, your shareholders may have taken a big hit as well. And we are all mindful of the governance watchdogs, ISS, Institutional Shareholder Services, ISS, and Glass Lewis, who score companies. And we have to disclose in the annual proxy in the CD&A section what we're doing on our compensation, and it has to be pay for performance. So you need quantitative measurable metrics. Often it's revenue, it may be EBITDA, it may be market share, it could be your NPS satisfaction score, but quantifiable things. And now some of those metrics are just not going to work. A company, depending on the industry, for example, at Wynn Resorts, where I'm a board member in the hospitality industry, that industry is just totally shut down. Cruise industry, shut down, entertainment shut down. So certain industries, your standard metrics can't really be applied, but your employees are working hard and you need to do a second half plan. So all companies are asking themselves this now, or if they haven't, I would really urge you, if you're in management, to have your HR and CFO and CEO raise the question. And if you're a director, I would have you go to your comp chair and say, what are we doing for the second half? Thus far, only 20% out of all the companies that are public have communicated externally what they're doing for the second half. So it's a moment to look at what are the performance metrics, because you want to have the chance to be able to pay both short and long term. And you need, as a comp organization in the comp committee, you're allowed to have what's called negative discretion, but you can't just have discretion in general, or you'll get a no or a negative vote on, say, on pay. So it's the moment to figure out what are the performance metrics that you could actually measure. Like it might be, for example, in a time like this, you could still measure revenue, but maybe profit may be harder, if depending on your industry. But you might be able to look at how have you strengthened the balance sheet? Have you raised capital? Are you being, careful and thoughtful in how you deploy your capital? So there may be other performance metrics so that you would have the opportunity to be able, with this new second half compensation plan, be able to propose something that you could then publicly disclose, which you would do in an 8K, and then be in a position to be able to have both long and short-term compensation in place for the second half of the year.
Now, it makes a lot of sense. So that's compensation, but what about the more, functional aspects of culture? I think we hear a lot about the importance of culture, the setting of, tone by leadership, by the board. How does that function in a time like right now? I mean, I think people are under an incredible amount of pressure, as you mentioned earlier. They're finding real challenges into total shift to a virtual environment and morale issues and things like that. What do you say to your fellow board members about truly focusing on the culture of an organization?
Well, the culture is the key, and it comes tone at the top. And it's a moment, actually, you should try and make it a positive opportunity to operationalize your cultural values, put them into place. For example, OYO is a budget hospitality company I'm associated with. And what they did, they're the second largest in terms of rooms right after Marriott. They've passed Hilton. You never heard of them. They're out of India, China, and emerging markets. And they do budget hotel. And what they've done, for example, is they have taken the opportunity to actually use their empty hotels in India as a possible place for quarantining people and for healthcare workers. So, look at the way that you can operationalize your culture in your community. Find a way to look at what you're doing in your culture with your employees. Another company I work with and admire and think very well of, Point Click Care, for example. What they did was they have call centers and they do enterprise software for healthcare, for skilled nursing facilities and assisted living. What they did was they took their recruiting people who would normally be doing outreach and developing leads and doing inside sales, and they're helping
the spouses of employees that got laid off to find a job. They're helping with placement. So there are things that you can do in your company. Be creative. What can you do in your employee base, in your community, that shows your cultural values and, brings people together and builds morale and, actually does positive things so that people stay cohesive. And of course, I'm sure every leader is regularly doing town hall and video and communicating, with their employee base. The other thing that occurs to me at a time like this, we all know that phrase, middle managers. I think it's time to empower them to be middle leaders and, have them take ownership in this virtual distributed work environment of how are they leading their teams, empower them, explain to them what you mean by middle leadership and how they can actually drive efficiency and productivity on their teams. And I think there's opportunities like that to really operationalize your cultural values.
I couldn't agree with you more. And that's what you just said was one of the fundamental things that I've seen work so well in this whole crisis and being part of our leadership term within our firm. That is the discussion that we as leaders are having. What do we need to do to help our employees? And that more than anything, I think really speaks to values and core purpose of your organization. And if you stick to those, if you have those clearly mapped out and in front of you, and you make that your focal point as a board, as a leadership team, I think, that's half the battle right there is staying true to your purpose. And if you didn't have a true purpose before, then finding that and really using this as a catalyst to drive that home to your employee base and your external stakeholders. But one of the things that I do want to touch on before we move on to our next session is how is equality and breaking down bias, whether it's conscious or unconscious, taken on renewed and prominent meeting for corporate directors? And this is a tough one. So I'd appreciate your thoughts on this.
So, diversity is really a positive thing because with diversity, you get better discussion, ideation, dialogue, thoughts, and outcomes. A diverse set of opinions and views allows you to get all the risks and different ideas out there and debated. In a boardroom today, we've had a big focus on gender diversity for the last few years. And public S&P 500 companies are at about 27% gender diverse and increasing very rapidly. For the open searches that the big search firms have, well over 45% of searches are for gender diverse. But I think, you should, and we are looking in our boardrooms now and actively talking further about diversity for ethnic diversity and for geographic diversity, bringing on directors who are from Europe or Asia. But we have to think about generational diversity. After all, the millennials are 37% of our workforce, which means our customers and our investors and our employees. And on top of that, it's 21% for Gen Zero. So I think it's also really important to look at generational diversity. And when we think about diversity, it really is about future-proofing our discussions and our decisions. And we are now in Boards of America, about 9% are African American, about 3% are Latino, a little over 2.5% are Asian. So, there's a long way to go. And our markets, of course, are diverse and our customers are diverse. So the more we bring in those perspectives, the better it's going to be.
Agreed. And one of the other areas that we're starting to get a lot of questions, commentary, discussions with folks is driving not only the diversity at the senior leadership and the board level, but really looking at the makeup of the company itself and what are your policies towards that, and how do you, not only just from a policy standpoint, but as a cultural standpoint, how do you make that more of a priority and more of a across the enterprise sentiment. And I think that's a bigger discussion that I'm starting to hear more of in the boardroom. And there's more discussion around having individuals that come from more of a human resource background in your boardroom, and to your point earlier about diversification of ideas and perspectives, to introduce those concepts where maybe they have not before sat inside the director's seats. What are your thoughts there?
True. We're looking for different backgrounds. So typically in a board, you have, let's say on average, 10 people. And you're going to want some people who have the industry knowledge of the company's business, healthcare, financial services, consumer packaged goods. So you need industry knowledge. You're going to need functional expertise like your compensation committee, your audit committee, your governance committee. You're going to need typically experienced chairs in those roles and financial expertise. But you can get, I think, really great insights when you bring on other functional, like you say, human resources. But even to me, even more critical is the digital expertise, because every product and every service is going to be tech enabled. And the whole customer journey and customer experience is very different, and taking friction and steps out of the business process and the workflow for people to transact, capturing, for example, in what's called containerization, your legacy ERP system, your SAP or your Oracle, and containerizing it, putting it in the cloud so that you can freeze some of the back office IT spend and repurpose it to the front office, the revenue acquisition side where you can embed analytics by organization and functional department. There's a lot of value in bringing tech expertise, I think, and entrepreneurial expertise onto a board, because legacy companies have to stay current. The reason that I think they stall and become low growth, certainly some of it is just the law of large numbers, but also they're not staying current, and the digital interlopers are coming up fast behind them and past them. And you don't want to become Blockbuster Video, or, you want to, who dismisses Netflix as not impacting your business. So I think it's critical to have those kinds of skills as well.
No, excellent comments there. And I think that that's a good point for us to maybe move into some of the more emerging risks and responsibilities of the board that we wanted to touch on today. And so maybe we'll kind of pick up on that sentiment in terms of the digital savvy of directors. And I know you've had a ton of experience in your own career from a technology standpoint, and recently read an article you'd written on COVID-19, a catalyst for change, that appeared in Directors and Boards, and wondering if you can expand a little bit more on the tech side of things, because I think, to your point, some of the companies that we're seeing as being very well positioned in the current situation are those that really had those investments up front. They were making investments before COVID-19 started. Now it's just more of an execution phase for them to really, they've already done their stress testing of their systems. Now they're kind of moving into, okay, we have this. Now how can we expand upon this and really go all in? Where other companies are in a much different footprint. They're finding that, they had very concentrated businesses that had not kept up with technology. And now they're having to pivot very quickly and try to build something where there wasn't anything before. So I'd love your thoughts on kind of both of those scenarios and kind of all the in-betweens, if you will.
So one of the things I think is very valuable in a board setting, and what I would offer as an idea, is to have a working dinner with outside speakers. We did this on one of my public boards. We were talking about the subject, this is several years ago, digital transformation. And I could kind of see that it was a buzzword, but you could see in your colleagues' eyes that everyone was not 100% clear, what is digital transformation? How do I apply it? What does it mean? So what we did was, instead of having the normal, the board goes out with some of the leadership team to a restaurant, we actually had a working dinner in the training room, and we brought in Accenture and then Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey, one after another. And we said to each of them, we want you to explain to us what is digital transformation. And we put them, they each spoke for 45 minutes with some Q&A and then a little 15-minute break. And we started at about 4 p.m. and we had the leadership team of the company there. So we all heard it. And by the third time you heard it described by 3 different professional services consulting firms, you started to get a really good idea of what did that mean on the customer journey, customer experience, transacting omni-channel. What is that? And then we followed it up in the future on another topic. We had a working lunch, and we had one of the leaders in cyber, Kevin Mandia, who is, he had founded a company named Mandiant, which now he's the CEO of a public company named FireEye, which is an advanced persistent threat cyber protection software company. So he came and spoke on, how do you make sure your cyber systems are strong enough, and what are the different types of cyber systems, from firewall to data leakage protection, every version of cyber, of which there's a very large number of different cyber specific software, and educated us on that. And then, of course, boards have a framework that they use from the National Institute of Standards, NIST, National Institute of Standards, that the audit committee typically does as part of the annual enterprise risk management framework. We look at cyber threat. So educating the board on these technology topics and these phrases. What is AI, ML, deep learning? How does that apply to my business at a departmental level? What is an anonymized data lake, and what kind of insights am I going to get? And how do I actually drive that into my product, my service, my offering, or use it to take costs out of my back office in the supply chain? So going through the topics in depth and with pragmatic how you apply it to the business in periodic working sessions, I think is a fantastic exercise for the board and for leadership. So that's one idea I would offer as how you actually, get the board to be aligned and tech savvy, because the companies that are leaning in and are tech enabling their product and service are outperforming significantly the laggards. So if you're going to be, a value-added director and a steward for the shareholders, I think there's going to be a continued acceleration into the importance of digital transformation and tech enablement.
No, I absolutely agree with your thoughts there. And we have a whole effort around BDO Digital, which does just that. And I think that's probably one of the most, the fastest growing area that we're seeing as a firm, where our clients, our contacts, they want continuing education. And the better boards that I work with are the boards that are continually inquisitive about what they don't know. They're going out, they're doing some research, and then they're going to experts that are, trained in this field to say, what am I missing? What can you tell me that I should be focused on with my management teams that'll help move this forward? And I think what you just hit on, I love the idea about bringing in some outside knowledge, making time for that as a board, I think is really critical to doing their oversight responsibilities. So let's turn this a little bit. And one of the things I'm interested in is, because of the magnitude of what COVID-19 has done with respect to economies, respect to companies, families, individuals, how have the boards that you've been sitting on dealt with those risks? Has it been a more fundamental full board embrace of this? Has it been establishing perhaps special committees of the board? Has it been allocated to existing committees? What has been kind of that secret sauce, or the flavors that you've seen in handling this response to crisis?
Well, I'll share an amazing anecdote of what I thought was outstanding that the CEO of Wynn Resorts, Matt Maddox, did. What he did was he created a really amazing public company, private sector, so private sector, government partnership. because, we had a clear need to understand, when could we reopen? How long do we furlough people? Will we have to lay people off? And we needed to understand that, and we needed our regulators and our state agencies, municipal governments, and at the state level in Nevada, Massachusetts, and in China, in Macau, where we're located. So what we did was, early in the crisis, the board suggested, and Matt jumped on it, he went to Johns Hopkins and got one of the senior epidemiologists. This is in January. And by having her, Dr. Katz, become a member of our team as an ongoing advisor, we then created partnerships with our local hospitals and healthcare providers and universities and pharma companies to gather the information of what was out there, what was the range of knowledge, and how could we help speed and support the reopening in states like Nevada. So, for example, when we have a call center that handles reservations, of course, nobody is calling when the resort is closed. So we seconded and lent those call center employees, I think it might have been around 70 plus people, to Southern Nevada's municipal health care organization to do COVID tracing, because they didn't have enough people in their call center. So we got trained. So we did public-private partnership, and we created the credibility and the opportunity to have a voice, to be heard, by having Dr. Katz from Johns Hopkins as our advisor, liaising with those agencies. Then we had credibility by liaising, and we were then able to help accelerate the plan for the state of Nevada by sharing the learnings and the insights. And it was so valuable that our CEO was invited to the White House to speak to President Trump with other CEOs on how they were handling the reopening in this private sector public partnership. So seeing things like that, I think, helped the employees understand. We had a lot of data we could share with the employees, and then, the learnings from the healthcare organizations, and then back into the state government. So I think those kinds of things really were valuable.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the things we haven't touched on, and I know you've had significant experience in the global setting, is what about transactional experience? What's happening in that regard with the boards? I mean, what are companies looking at, whether it's opportunity or risk management? How are boards approaching that in the midst of everything else? It's trying to be forward thinking about, business in the next phase of this whole thing.
Well, it's actually, I wish and I hope every board is speaking about it, because it's kind of hard to hold up, the mirror and look at yourself and say, gosh, I'm a low grower. I'm a value company. I'm not really a growth company anymore. It's hard to admit those things, right? And so you have to be very honest and have that conversation, because I think we're going to see a lot of unsolicited inbound merger and acquisition outreach. So if you're sort of a smaller medium company that's kind of flatlining and not a growth company, you might be well served to ask yourself, should we sell ourselves now? It might be better to pick your own white knight and who you want to combine with than be on your back foot when the knock on the door happens and you're scrambling. Because, we've seen this wave of deconglomeratization for about 40 years, and we're at the back end of it. So there's a lot of small pure play companies that aren't going to have the critical mass. You're a small valve company, that's a $300 million public valve company. You may not be able to really be substantially large enough, and you'll be better off combined with another valve company of scale. So asking those kinds of questions. And on the other end, if you are have a strong balance sheet and you're in a direct-to-consumer online business, it's a moment to go shopping and buy the smaller competitors or the technology tuck-ins. But you're likely not going to see the landscape stay quiet between inbounds. Of course, activism is going to wake up considerably. The activist landscape, I think, is going to just absolutely become hugely active, starting in Q3, where the activists are building positions quietly. They have their investment thesis. They have big war chests, and they're going to start to go after companies. And historically, the number of activist campaigns before 2008 was 85 a year. In the last 10 years, it's about 90. But in 2009, following the 08 crisis, it went up by 50%. 50%. And we're going to see, I think, that same kind of big increase in activist campaigns. So it would be a good time to look at yourself and maybe have your banker come in and do an outside-in assessment to see how will an activist look at you. And, really look at, do you need to future-proof your board? Do you need to look at your operations? Carl Icahn went after Tenneco in October before COVID, and he had given them a list of things he thought they should do to improve their business. Well, you can be sure post-COVID, now that they haven't necessarily done all those actions, they're going to be, on the list, I would expect, as an example. So I think that we through this period, the activists haven't been as busy because it's unseemly in a health crisis, but I think that things are going to change soon.
Now that's very important, and I think we're kind of blending a bunch of different topics together now as we start to think about some of the other areas we were going to touch on today. But before we move on to the communications and engagement sector, because that obviously goes hand in hand with your activist sentiments, and one of the other topics that I want to bring forward right now, and maybe we'll make that bridge, but ESG, so environmental and social governance. Again, you wrote another great article covering allocation of capital towards value drivers and strengthening the brand and real action that companies are taking in this ESG landscape that we're finding. And it's not just, reporting on these things. It's really embracing what your company can do to look at your long-term sustainable prospects. So I'd be really interested in your thoughts, particularly as companies are engaged right now. And I know there's been a huge push, whether it be through the media, through true ESG drivers, but a huge push to bring the ESG into the conversation of what companies should be and could be doing to prepare themselves as they emerge from COVID-19. So please share what you think here.
So ESG, environmental social governance, there's a couple of parts of it. So there's the environmental piece, which was your sustainability, energy efficiency, how you use water, clean water, everything you're doing in the environment. Social is diversity, inclusion, equal pay, what you're doing to build your culture, your community, how you're engaging, your wellness, your OSHA, your safety, all of those kinds of things. And then on the governance side, you have your corporate board, your anti-money laundering, your cyber protections, anti-bribery, your programs on no child labor, not using endangered species, all that kind of stuff. And today, there's confusion for a lot of board members and a lot of people on, what framework do I use? Because there's about, I think, 7 or 8 different frameworks. There's, SASB, GRI, an alphabet soup. And then there are reporting agencies like MSCI and ISS, where they report your score. So the Fortune 500, all 500 companies are measured by MSCI and these other reporting agencies. So you have to pick what framework and what reporting agency. And it's kind of confusing. And they're not all the same. They're different. They don't agree on the quantitative measures of the different metrics. So here's what I would recommend you do. Don't be paralyzed and don't be overwhelmed, but start. Here's how you start. Look at what your company is doing. Everybody has great HR policies. We all have them, right? We all have equal pay, diversity, inclusion, wellness, OSHA, safety. We have cyber protections, all those things I was listing. Just start measuring what you're already doing. It's a matter of collecting the information, communicate it, pick your first framework, and just report. And it's incremental. It's a journey, but you'll get credit for it with all of your stakeholders, because we've moved in our thinking in many companies from what was shareholder centricity to stakeholder centricity, which your stakeholders are, of course, your investors, but they are your employees, and they are your community, and they are your customers. It's a range of stakeholders, and you will get credit, and you'll begin the journey and pick a framework, pick a rating agency, and build on it and start the journey, and report it out in your proxy. And private companies need to do this as well, because your private equity investors or your venture capital investors, they have limiteds, and their limiteds might be, the Yale University, Columbia University, Harvard. It could be the teachers' pension fund, sovereign wealth funds. All of those limited investors have very strong ESG policies, and they want your private companies to begin communicating. So there's all upside. You don't have to be perfect. Everybody knows it's going to keep changing. And I think the World Economic Forum expects that by the end of the year, they will have a recommendation from the big accounting firms of a consensus view of sort of the first 22 most important metrics to start reporting on. And so I think it's going to get clearer, but my suggestion is to begin the process and not let it be overwhelming. Just start.
Agreed. Thank you for those thoughts. All right, I'm going to move us along to our next section on communicating and engagement. And we'll spend a few minutes here, but really want to understand, Betsy, from your point of view, what if any, have been noticeable changes, whether in frequency or quality of engagement, not only between the board and management, but within the board itself? If you could talk about some of the things that you're seeing.
Yes. I think that the frequency, especially in the beginning, almost every board, private or public, was having weekly board calls. And, it was surprisingly effective. And I think that, normally a board meeting takes a lot of preparation, and it, is an interruption for the CEO and the leadership team that are operating the company to prepare. But since everybody was in crisis mode, we began this high frequency of dialogue, and it aligned us because we got a deeper understanding of the operations and the frequency of decision making. And so it was almost like, annually boards have a multi-day strategy offsite retreat to look into the long-term 1, 3, 5-year strategy plan. But we were immersed in it, and we became closer thought partners as a board with management, and became more able to contribute to the rapid decision making. And we were able to then encourage management's higher level of engagement with the employees and the need to be transparent. It's all been really positive. We're now back to monthly meetings or quarterly meetings. Most companies, I think, are still on a monthly cadence, but I think there's a deeper understanding of the business that has come out of this, and all for the positive.
No, that's a great point, and I think looking at some of the communications and engagements with shareholders and others that use the information that the company produces, maybe just stepping back into the topic we were just within in terms of ESG. Do you have any specific thoughts around the use of integrated reporting? And by integrated, I mean encompassing ESG reporting into your financial reporting. So currently, the majority of reporting on ESG metrics is done kind of outside of your financial statements. And in the US, we don't have a specific requirement for public companies to do what I'm suggesting, but elsewhere in the globe, it's really picking up a lot of steam and interest, particularly from the largest of the large companies. But what are your thoughts on that as we kind of migrate and see more and more companies embracing ESG types of reports?
So ESG 20 years ago was called Corporate Social Responsibility, CSR. And like many of the governance trends started in Europe. And in fact, oh my gosh, maybe it's 18, 17 years ago, I recall specifically the FTSE 100 required companies to have a CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility score. And this has now become ESG. So we are seeing this come out of Europe, and Schneider Electric, which is about a 30 billion euro company whose board I was on for about 8 years, always had ESG or CSR as part of the pay for performance for the leadership team. It was so important because they're an energy management, energy efficiency company, and they walk the walk and believe passionately in energy efficiency and energy management systems that they deploy. And that was part of the compensation. So I think we're going to start to see ESG as part of compensation for leadership teams. We look at that at Volvo. We consider that where I'm a board member. I think we're going to see this as part of compensation systems coming forward and public reporting systems over time. And I will tell you that for the S&P 500 largest companies, the ones that have the highest score from the rating agency MSCI, and then the framework company SASB, SASB, those companies have actually performed better in terms of financial performance, access to capital, all of the financial metrics, EBITDA, market share, have all performed better where they have had the highest score on ESG as measured in the SASB framework and reported out in the MSCI rating agency. So there is a correlation with higher financial results and higher ESG scores.
Great, thank you, Betsy. And I think we're kind of running close to being short on time, so I'm going to move us through a couple of things just kind of to leave folks with in terms of resources. I really appreciate your comments today, and this went quite quickly. So while I'm doing that, I do want to just point out a few things for our folks today. So we've included several thought pieces on your website. In your slide deck. I'm including a link to Betsy's book, which I had mentioned previously and had the pleasure of reviewing again myself, and highly recommend it. And then in addition, several resource centers and articles that may capture your interest. And then just before we adjourn for this afternoon I really would like to encourage everyone, if you haven't already, to please subscribe to BDO's Center for Corporate Governance. If you've liked what you've heard today, have been on prior programs that we've produced, please do sign up. You can customize what you like to receive. And of course, you'll be invited to future events and receive thought leadership appropriate to your area of expertise. And then with that, I would like to announce an opportunity for Public Company Board of Directors. We're very excited to invite you all to participate in a series of 2 pulse surveys on topical governance issues. this summer, and then it'll culminate in our annual 2020 full board survey this fall. So the series will be conducted by an independent third party, so that provides anonymity to respondents, and it's your opportunity to be influential, and draw on your valuable experiences to assist the governance community and your peers in providing perspectives on a variety of timely governance matters. So your participation in this will get you priority access to the full findings in each tranche of the survey series. So if you're a public company director and would like to participate, please respond yes, and you'll be added to our invitation list. And again, your responses will be kept anonymous to BDO and others. It'll just be compiled in a cumulative examination of the results. So that's our first polling question. And our second is, of course, if you would like to be subscribed to BDO's Center for Corporate Governance, by all means, please take advantage of that opportunity. Oops, I think I just canceled out. Sorry. So Betsy, with that, I do have kind of a final thought for you. And I think we spent a lot of time talking about some of the various aspects and the diversification of the board. One of the questions we received through the Q&A asked if there's a metrics for board comp based on size, revenue, frequency of meetings, responsibilities, exposure, and voting boards versus advisory boards. And that might be something we can take offline. But if there's a tool that you're familiar with or that you use that you could share, that might be helpful.
There are a lot of metric studies on director compensation. You see them from the search firms like Korn Ferry, Spencer Stewart, Heidrick and Struggles. They publish some information. You can Google it. Also, the compensation consultants like Bradford Aon, Cook, Hewitt, they also have some information, and I think that some of that is out there. If you look under the Edgar website, you can look up any company and see their proxy and see what the directors are compensated. Typical public board comp in America is in the range of anywhere from 100 up to about 300. It depends on the size. A larger cap company, an ExxonMobil, a Merck, a Pfizer is going to be higher than a smaller. And compensation elements are a retainer fee and an equity grant. Sometimes it's restricted stock, time-based units. Sometimes it's stock options. So tech companies, earlier, smaller companies use more options. Larger value companies use more restricted stock. You want to be sure you're aligned with the shareholders. So your stock goes down. If the stock isn't performing, maybe you haven't been a very good steward on behalf of the shareholders, so you're feeling the pain with them. You want to be sure it's performance-based in terms of some alignment with the comp.
No, exactly. And I know with respect to the middle market companies, BDO issues several annual surveys around both director pay as well as CEO and CFO pay that kind of breaks down by industry a lot of the trends that we're seeing in compensation. And I think this year will be particularly exciting as we work through that analysis. So Betsy, I wanted to really thank you today for your comments. In the last minute of our presentation, I'd love to leave you with the last word and just any closing thoughts you have for directors that are trying to navigate this crazy new world we're living in.
Well, Amy, first of all, thank you, and thanks to the whole BDO community. And I guess what I would say to directors is, the more we engage and communicate together as a community, the better. So I know that Amy and BDO welcome, as do I, more questions, more dialogue. I'd love to learn from you. I'd love to see what you're seeing, what trends you're observing. There's so much that you can share that I would really welcome hearing from you and learning more and staying in touch. And as Amy said, if you send questions, we'll respond, and we're going to together put a thought piece out for you. And thank you so much for your engagement and time.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to turn the program over to Sean to just wrap us up. Thank you all for your attendance today and look forward to meeting you virtually in future programs.